we are working on a project on multilingual learning and achievement in the context of Botswana, Tanzania, and Zambia. And what our project is about is in the short title that we have for the project, which is bringing the outside in. And our aim is to understand what roles multiple languages that learners use outside the classroom can and should influence learning inside the classroom, where usually one medium of instruction is adopted. So we thought it might be a really nice idea to bring together similar projects in the GCRF funding, which of course covers many more areas than language. So we wanted and thought that it might be nice to bring together those projects which are to do with language, just to have an idea what project is going on, what impact and results are emerging, whether there are any synergies that we can draw, and also importantly to have an opportunity to discuss some of the more practical aspects of conducting South-North research. So this is the third talk in our series of 5 talks, and we're very grateful to all of our speakers for kindly accepting our invitations to present their work, but also especially to all of you, the audience who's joining us from different parts of the world, for your contributions and discussions and questions. Thanks very much for making the time. The remainder of the talks can be found on our project webpage, which will be given in the chat. So questions will be done through the chat, and we ask you to put your questions in the chat at the end of the talk, or as the talk is progressing, as ideas hit you as it's going along, and Tracy will kindly moderate this for us. So the talk will be about 30 minutes long, and then we'll have questions with a view to ending at 1 p.m. So coming to today, we are very excited and happy to welcome Dr. Clyde Ancarno. So this is this is an Anglophone trying to sort of, make a good French pronunciation. I hope I did okay. Clyde is a lecturer in applied linguistics at King's College London. Her research involves discourse analysis, corpus linguistics, pragmatics, and ethnography. So she's currently principal investigator on the multilingual education in the Gambia project, which is the focus of our presentation today. So without much further ado, I would like to please welcome Clyde on her talk, which is entitled Multilingual Education in the Gambia.
Okay, and can you all see my screen?
Yes, I think
yes.
so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this talk. I've got just 1 second. So as you can see, we'll talk about the project Multilingual Education in the Gambia. Who are we? I'm not going to introduce myself again, but Mamadou Jang, who is the co-presenter today, isn't. I was hoping that he might be able to join us for the Q&A, but he's got other engagement. But he's got expertise in curriculum development and teacher training in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, and he's currently working at the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education in the Gambia. And so he's Director of Science and Technology Education, and importantly, from the point of view of the talk today, he's coordinator of the National Language Programme, which is responsible for the implementation of the early parallel biliteracy programme, which I'll talk about a lot today. Why have I ended up focusing on multilingual education in the Gambia? I've been going to the Gambia, or I had been at the time, I had been going to the Gambia for quite a while, for a number of years, for personal reasons. And I wanted to get to meet fellow academics and so on and so forth. And I discovered at the time, and I was surprised, that there were literacy lessons in the national languages which were happening in school. And that piqued my interest, because so far by friends and family of my partner, I'd always been told that education was all in English. So that's very much the starting point of the project. The way we've organized it, so Mamadou has pre-recorded his contribution. So I'll start by introducing the project. Then he will talk a little bit about language in education, the policy context, and the biliteracy program. And then I will focus on one area of challenge, which was, so it's one out of several, but which was revealed by the interview, and that is the lack of literacy practices and expertise in the national languages. And what we mean by lack of literacy practices is the fact ironically that national languages are not very frequently read and written. And here, although I said at the time that hopefully Mamadou will be able to join us, sadly he won't be able to. So multilingual education in the Gambia project. So it's been funded. It's very much the same route as Paul and Margaret, it seems. So it's through the King's QR fund. So it's funded by the GCRF in that way, and also I had some funding from King's College London as well. It involves, so it's working in partnership with the University of the Gambia, the National Language Programme of the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, and Gambia College, which is responsible for the training of primary school teachers. So what it focuses on within the landscape of multilingual education in the Gambia is, and I've used, unusual and innovative very purposefully here. It's an unusual and innovative early parallel biliteracy program which introduces literacy lessons from grade 1 to 3, so lower basic education level, in 7 of the Gambia's national languages. So that is Jola, Mandinka, Manjako, Pular, Serahule, Serer, and Wolof. And what this program entails is that literacy lessons now, both since 2015, both happen in English and in the national languages. And the choice of the national language depends on the area language, so namely the language spoken in the area where schools are. So at times there are more than one languages represented in schools. And it's very much, so when I discovered that these literacy lessons were introduced, I tried to turn to literature, and I found out that very little has been written about language in education policy in the Gambia. And so that's why it's very much an exploratory research project. Who is part of the research team? So I am the PI of the project. I've been working with a data collector, so Lamin, who's on the right-hand side on this slide. And I'm currently in the process of recruiting a project administrator whom I'll be working very closely with, particularly when I'm doing some field work in the second term of next academic year. So the data that was gathered as part of this project is interviews conducted to get preliminary insights into language and education policy in the Gambia, but particularly focusing on the views of the participants on the decision to introduce early national language literacy lessons. So 12 interviews were conducted, and all the interviewees are professionals whose job is relevant to the introduction of the national language literacy lessons. So here they are. So 5, I've kept the roles fairly broad so as to preserve the anonymity of the interviewees. So we've got head teachers, staff working for the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, primary school teachers, teacher trainers, and staff at the University of the Gambia. So here, although there is no data concerning the linguistic composition of the Gambia, we've got, so this chart, by the way, is based on the last census in 2013. The ethnic composition of the Gambia allows us to get a sense of how the national languages are spoken. So you can see that the most widely spoken language is likely to be Mandinka, followed by Fula, Wolof, then Jola, Serahule, and Serer and Manjako. By the way, I should say here, these 2 languages which are far less, or these 2 ethnic groups, which are far less prominent in the Gambia, were added after the pilot project, so when it was decided that the pilot project would be rolled out nationwide. So they were a later addition. So this will be the first contribution of Mamadou. I'd like to say here, so just for you to get a sense of where things are at in terms of the language and education policy. So officially English only is used as language of overall instruction, but unofficially the national languages, as you might expect, are used daily in primary schools. And since 2015, so those the national languages have been used as language of initial literacy instruction. So this distinction between language and overall instruction and language of initial literacy instruction is a distinction that was established by, used by Trudeau in reference to Zambia as well. The premise of this biliteracy program, I've already mentioned this briefly, is to improve literacy in English, to improve literacy in the national languages, but also to support content learning more generally. And the last point, and I'm going to let Mamadou speak, is to remind that, yes, although it is often recommended that 6 to 8 years of strong dual language instruction is the best option. At the moment, that's not viable really in the Gambia, but National Assembly members are still actively working on developing language in education policy, which integrates the languages of the Gambia in education. So without further ado, I will let Mamadou speak.
While following discussion with the national...
Could you confirm that you can hear properly? I'll play it. Please let me know if you can't hear.
Assembly members who are actually interested to see how we are going to introduce the use of national languages as a medium of instruction for early foundational levels. We are, as a ministry, trying to come up with a national language policy and clearly map out how we can promote the use of national languages in the school system across the board for the literacy strategies. Because evidence has shown that the best way to develop early literacy in children is to use a language that they can communicate fluently in. And for most children in the Gambia, who are especially coming from rural areas where English is not spoken to them at home and their immediate environment, they are beginning to learn English as a second language in schools. Of course, the national languages would be a better window of opportunity for those children to be able to develop early literacy strategies that will help them to develop the second language.
Okay, so here Mamadou is going to talk to us about the early parallel biliteracy program. We've got on the right hand side here a brief timeline. So the reason why the early literacy in national language pilot project was launched is because the early grade reading assessment in 2007 was very alarming. And what's happened, because the evaluation of this pilot project showed that having the literacy, the national language literacy lessons were having a positive impact, and that's what is captured by the chart here. So showing an improvement, obviously we need other data, but it's showing that the reading, the number of correct words read per minute by the children in grade 1, 2, 3 has improved as a result, had improved as a result of the pilot project. So that's why it was then decided that this this early parallel biliteracy program would be rolled out nationwide in 2015. And what should also be mentioned for those of you who may not be familiar with the Gambia is that in 2016, there was a change of president. So that's likely to have an impact as well on education, on language and education and other areas of social life in the Gambia as well. So I'll let Mobudu speak again.
From 2015, we started rolling out the National Language Pilot Program to cover all low basic schools in the Gambia. However, it is important to note that in the literacy strategy, national language is used side by side with literacy strategies in Jollyphonic and Sagwa, meaning every day in the literacy strategy, children will receive instruction in the national language that they are comfortable speaking and interacting in, and later in the day, the same day, they will also receive literacy through Jollyphonics or Segra.
Okay. And now Mamadou will talk to us about the rationale for the early parallel biliteracy program.
Well, the rationale for the biliteracy approach is that we know for sure that children stand to develop literacy strategies faster if they use their national languages. However, for a long time, English has been used as medium of instruction, and people believe, parents and the general public believe, that the sure way for their children's success is through the use of English, how much English they're able to speak, and so forth. So it will be difficult to just change, from English to national languages if you do not get the buy-in from the general public and the parents. Also, one of the other reasons is that national languages have been piloted several times in the country in the past, and of course we have seen places like Senegal and Mali also trying to pilot this, but however all these pilots have faced resistance both from parents and even the teachers who are supposed to be implementing these strategies sometimes feel reluctant to do so. But then, the data has shown that, the child stands to read much faster if they are given instruction through their language that they can interact with comfortably.
So here, apologies that I lost. So here, what I think the two things that are really worth bearing in mind is that, yes, on the one hand, the program was prompted by the view that children learn best when taught in a language they can communicate fluently in, and that teaching using those languages to teach early literacy can help reduce school failure and dropout in the early grades. So that, I think, is an important takeaway message from the Gambian context, but also what has been very instrumental in deciding to opt for a parallel biliteracy program is the last bullet point here. So the lack of trust in using national languages in education in the Gambia among parents and the general public, but also among teachers, teacher trainers, policymakers to some extent. And this is something which comes up in the interviews. Now, the situation now is that there continues to be efforts to ensure the success of the program, but challenges remain really significant. And that's something that the multilingual education in the Gambia project focuses on, but focuses on drawing on and really listening to and really trying to engage with expertise and knowledge found in the Gambia. So, as I said before, I'm going to focus on one key area of challenges, namely the limited literacy practices and the lack of expertise in the national languages. So here, with this slide, the focus is on the fact that the national languages are rarely read or spoken, and that includes sorry, I should have, there's a typo here, rarely read or written. So they are widely spoken, they are the language of everyday communication in the Gambia, but they are rarely read or written. I've got a quote here from Suleiman, which I will read. So he says, see, and we haven't produced enough materials in our national languages. Most of the time it's spoken, you know. We are in a spoken world where, you know, orality takes precedence over written text, and that's what we need to. But to do that, we need to have people who are trained for that. You cannot just, because you are Mandinka or Wolof or Manjaku, you can't just wake up and then write. So here, what Suleiman, and this is something which came up frequently in the interviews, he establishes a link, you know, between the fact that the national languages are not commonly read and written, and the implications from the point of view of implementing the national language literacy lessons. Something else which is also talked about quite often is, so in addition to the teachers not, you know, usually not necessarily reading and writing the national languages, they also sometimes have limited competency in the languages of certain communities they're teaching. So I'll read this quote from Salifou here. Since you cannot speak that language and the community is that language, like you are posted to Faraba, now the majority are Mandinkas and you are a Jola. Okay, so you cannot speak Mandinka, and children in your class are all Mandinka. You are the teacher and the Jola, and when you talk to them in English, they will not understand. They will not understand you. So that is a constraint. So these and as you can expect, this came up with teacher interviewees in particular, but this is often mentioned in relation to the posting of teachers. So teachers are posted in Gambia. And what is also, the interviews reveal that the teachers on a daily basis have a range of sometimes fairly elaborate strategies to deal with multilingualism in their classrooms. So ranging from pairing children in a particular kind of way so that they support each other, so using students as language brokers or students translating for the teacher, etc. So sometimes, interestingly, some of those strategies really involve a decentering of teachers, but I won't get sidetracked. The third point I wanted to mention in relation to this broad area of challenges is the lack of theoretical knowledge and understanding of the national languages, and that applies to also to teachers and linguists. And we've got, I'll read this quote by Sharif here. So he said, the first challenge is these languages, they need to be developed. They need to be developed, not only the orthographies, but its content. And the difficulty we have is we have limited expertise in this area. And if I were to suggest to policymakers, I would say, let's do the groundwork first. Get people to go and study some of these languages in countries where at least they were able to develop it. Because I know in Senegal, when it comes to Wolof, and when you go to Mali, for example, they've developed some of these materials. So what was, I couldn't include, you know, more from Sharif here, but his view was very much that without developing this theoretical knowledge, without getting linguists involved, that it would be impossible to successfully introduce national language literacy lessons, but national languages in education more generally. So the lack of literacy practices and the lack of expertise in the national languages undermine the biliteracy, the early parallel biliteracy program in at least two ways. So I hope that's what's been shown by the previous three slides. So on the one hand, it's difficult to develop adequate national language initial literacy resources, and it's also difficult to develop adequate training for teachers and trainers. So this is something that comes up quite strongly in the interviews. And also it means that it's students' access to a rich print environment, which is so critical in terms of developing literacy, that is also hindered. So clearly there's a need to develop expertise in the national languages. So there are already initiatives which are underway. So for example, during the lockdown, there were interactive radio literacy lessons, which were broadcast on the radio. National language literacy material has been developed as well successfully by the National Language Programme. So that's in collaboration with the World Bank and the Global Partnership for Education. But if and these are this is based both on the interviews and conversations we've had with Mamadou and other people as well. Clearly other initiatives are needed to ensure that the long-term success of the introduction of national language literacy lessons and the introduction of national languages in education in other ways as well. So there are examples on this slide here. Initiatives could include the development of more materials in the national languages. The corpus planning seems to be something which will need to be carefully considered. Reflecting on how to enrich the national language literacy environment in schools. So the PRESA project, for example, provides interesting insights, making more national language resources available in school libraries, further the exposure to the national languages outside of schools. Here, what should be noted is that currently, for those of you who've been to the Gambia, they'll be able to confirm this. So the linguistic landscape is dominated by English. It's very infrequent to see any of the national languages written in the linguistic landscape of the Gambia, other than a little bit of Wolof, for example, on adverts, on billboards, and so on and so forth. So I'm talking about writing here. And lastly, another suggestion here. So clearly the Gambian population at large, its understanding and knowledge of national languages, it seems that there clearly is a need for that to be enhanced. So to conclude, well, I'm hoping that that the presentation today shows that the project contributes to the scarce research into language in education in West Africa and into early parallel biliteracy programs as well. I think it shows how important collaboration between researchers, educators and policymakers is as well. And the potential, so clearly that not much is said about the potential of early parallel biliteracy programs, and I think that so far the findings that have been the findings of the project show that there is potential for the early parallel biliteracy program in the Gambia to support literacy development and to support content learning as well. And the last point here, hopefully it recalls how important the integration of African languages in education is, how relevant it is to social life in Africa and the wide array of implication that it has. It's very much so it's recalling, I think, how much language in education questions are a social issue. And this is this is Mamadou and I saying thank you to you. I've got a quote here which I'd like to read to you. It's from Babu Cowboy, which has been very supportive of the project, who was permanent secretary of the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for about 10 years from the early 2000s, and who was around when the National Language Programme was launched. And this is what he had to say. The reason for teaching these languages in lower basic schools is that they are primary tools we use to get out of the many social, political, economic and developmental dilemmas the Gambia faces as a developing nation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Clyde, and to Mamadou as well for your contributions. It's a really, really interesting talk. We have time for questions, so if people would like to type their questions in the chat, I will try my best to monitor those and feed those to you, Clyde. And I guess with the risk of sort of abusing my role in monitoring questions, I might sort of lead off with one if I may. I was just really interested in the idea of the national languages, and just if you were able to say anything about how schools, at the beginning I think you said that schools are sort of free to choose the national languages that are used or taken up in the schools, and I was just wondering if there was any more you could say about that in terms of what factors are involved in schools selecting those languages. Is it sort of the profile of the incoming teachers? Is it the profile of the students in their school? I'm just I'm thinking through the lens of our own project as well, and sort of some of the things we're finding there. So I just wondered if that might be something you were able to.
I think to answer that question, I'll go back to the term area language, which as far as I understand isn't a term which is used in other in contexts other than the Gambia, and it's very much so. Area language means the language spoken in the community. So it's not so much the schools that choose the language as such, is the language, the languages which are commonly spoken in that community. So in some areas in the Gambia will be it will be clearly a village where the majority, 95+% of the children are speakers of Mandinka, let's say. So in that's what would determine the national language that will be used in the literacy lesson. So in that particular school, the national language literacy lesson will be in Mandinka. You can imagine that in urban areas, you have all the languages represented. So in that case, you would have literacy lessons in all, so they split during the time that they have dedicated to the national language literacy lessons. The students would be separated and would go to their respective lessons. This is, I'm currently, so I've got, the way those languages have been decided, so the ministry has been doing some surveying. So I've got, I haven't got the entirety of the data as it stands, but they've got for each school the languages that are to be covered by the national language literacy lessons. And it ranges, sometimes it's one language, sometimes it's more than one language.
Great, that's great, thank you. And yes, we have a question from Payman. Do you believe that by concentrating on English, the Gambia is losing some potential local talent who may not be capable of doing well in language acquisition? So that idea of,
Yeah, so could you read that question again? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah. So do you believe that by concentrating on English, the Gambia is losing some potential local talent who may not be capable of doing well in language acquisition?
Well, I guess the launch of the decision and the commitment, although obviously there are many hurdles and obstacles and challenges, etc. I think that of itself answers the question. So it is felt that that the focus of English is both within education and outside of education is preventing. So it's not only preventing literacy development, but it's also preventing content learning, and therefore it's preventing and that I haven't mentioned, but as some of you may have gathered, that the children who are most affected by the current language in education policy are students from the rural areas. So in that sense, going back to the question, those local, those talents in the rural areas of the Gambia are lost because the children are not able to learn, because suddenly when they go to school, there's being spoken to in a language that they don't necessarily understand. So yes, it's about the development of children at an individual level, but the development of the country more generally. So opening up job prospects, for example, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one from Nancy, I guess, about the sort of organisation of the sessions in a way. So when Mamadou was discussing how languages interact, there was a sense that the languages are kept apart. So in the morning, sort of the literacy might be taking place in one language, and then in the afternoon another language. So are there moments that you see of sort of multilingual interaction, or maybe some sort of translanguaging type activities, or is it really sort of quite divided in that sense? Are there kind of delineated barriers between the two languages, or
so here, if we leave aside the literacy lessons, the reality is that yes, English is supposed to be used, English only is supposed to be used as a language of instruction, but the national languages are used, apologies for the background noise, the national languages are used to various extents. Obviously, it depends on the school, it depends on the teacher, it depends on the students, etc. But the national languages are used in classrooms. So that's what I meant by unofficially in classrooms. So that applies to all lessons. So, needless to say that I can imagine that context in the literacy lessons. In the literacy lessons in the national languages are spoken. But in other subjects, including the literacy lessons in English, then yes, there would be, the national languages would be used. Although in theory it shouldn't happen. And although, as in many other sub-Saharan African countries, until fairly recently, there were very harsh. So this is something I'm drawing on the interviews here. So what's we currently mentioned is the very harsh, strict English-only policies. So where the students had to wear animal skulls if they were seen to speak. So that there's been a move away from this, but officially it's English only. Yeah.
And just a quick sort of follow-up to that, and then there's a couple of other questions about the connections with Senegal, which are really interesting. But quickly to follow up on that point, in the posting of the teachers, is there an active sort of policy to ensure that teachers who speak certain area languages are not posted to those area language? Is there an active policy there?
This is a very contentious area, and that's something I want to further explore when I'll next be visiting the Gambia. What participants, well, especially teacher participants in the interviews, what they mentioned quite often is examples such as the one I read of teachers being posted where they don't speak the language. So that seems to suggest that there's no consideration, of the languages, the national languages spoken by the teacher. But what I've gathered is that despite this, the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education seems to be looking into the linguistic profile of their teachers, but that they're not able to, they've only got so many teachers and they're not able quite frequently to match. So hence the kind of language brokering I was mentioning, and it was really inspiring actually to see how the range of translanguaging, etc., strategies which are used in classrooms to overcome that linguistic barrier.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. Ian and Serge, apologies, I am coming to your questions, I promise, but I just sort of see Joy has also posed a question that's linked to this thread, I think, as well. So I'll go with that and then I'll come back to Ian and Serge in a moment. So writers and curriculum developers were brought in 2016 to develop a curriculum in the 7 languages and books for children to read. Is there still a connection with them, and are they still part of this work? And then Joyce sort of mentions that they could continue to develop some, you know, rich materials there. So if you've come across this connection here at all, so the 2016.
So the resources which were developed as part of the National Language Programme, yeah. So as far as I understand, again, I want to engage a bit more, but as far as I understand that they're continuing to work on these resources in collaboration with the World Bank. If Mumadi was there, he would be able to provide further insights. But as you can imagine, you know, the challenges were such that you know, there is room for improvement in terms of the literacy material in the national languages, but also I've been told also in relation to the material used for English as well. So this is something that they're currently working on.
And that seems to link nicely to sort of Ian's question about, so at least some of the national languages in the programme are also spoken in Senegal. Is it possible for the Gambian programme to benefit from language development that has already taken place in Senegal?
Yes and no. So that will be the next step in the project. So to really work out what has been done and what's available in Senegal. The thing that should be borne in mind, though, is that the varieties of the national languages, so the variety of Mandinka, for example, Wolof, spoken in Senegal, isn't quite the same as the one in the Gambia, and that within the Gambia itself, although it's the smallest country in mainland Africa, already there are different varieties. So in terms of the material development we were referring to early on, something which had to be considered is how do we address this variety of the Gambian varieties of the national languages. And so that's something that's been taken on board, and which I was pleasantly which I was pleased to hear, when I was told, because I think that's one of the big challenges. How do you embrace all the different varieties? But they've got, at school level, they adapt material as well to make sure that it reflects, when applicable, it reflects the variety of the national language spoken in that area.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think this links to the question from Serge also, who says they're wondering how much support there is for the description of targeted languages. So what orthographies are used, and so in the case of Jola, is the orthography the same as the one spoken in Senegal? So that's quite interesting there, I think. That kind of...
Yeah, I'm not going, in terms of, so there's a team in the National Language Programme. So they've got desk officer for each language, and I'm not going to. My understanding is that for some of the languages they had to develop orthography. Orthography was already fully developed for other languages. I'm not entirely sure, and that's these are questions I want to ask to the desk officers, so that I'm not entirely sure the extent to which it compares to, for example, the varieties of the national languages in Senegal. So yeah.
Great, yeah, thank you. And another one from Frederica is, so Casper, apologies for pronunciation here, is it Yuffamans has worked on grassroots literacies in the Gambia. Is there any attention being paid by current applied research to informal literacy, for instance, in Quranic schools, in Anjami, in social media, personal letters and text messages, and the strategies used by readers and writers there? So I guess there's so the grassroots literacy
Yes.
practices?
Yeah, as far as I know, the last piece of work conducted in this area was Casper's work. If anybody knows otherwise, I'd be very interested to find out. But as far as I know, his book was the last foray into that area.
And do you get a sense from, I know you said you had done interviews with teachers. I just wondered as well if you'd spoken to other, if I've missed this, I apologise, but if you've spoken to other kind of community members as well, maybe other parents or carers or others, about their attitudes towards uses of local languages or area languages in schools, and kind of if there's sort of what types of feedback are coming from those sort of stakeholders, I guess, as well.
Yeah, so currently, so originally, I wanted to conduct interviews with parents and students as well, and then a combination of pregnancy and COVID hasn't allowed me to. So I stopped at the professionals I focused on today, but based on conversations personal conversations I've had with parents, and what parents are reported to say, or their reactions to the introduction of the national language literacy lessons, it seems to be that frequently the purpose of them isn't really the role of national languages in education isn't really supported or understood, and hence something else which I've discussed quite extensively with some of the interviewees is the extent to which there had been awareness raising campaigns, and let's say that it's ongoing. So I had some interviewees saying nothing has happened, and other interviewees suggesting that there had been some initiatives, but that more was needed. So hence what I said in relation to one of to Mamadou's contribution in relation to when he was describing the biliteracy program. So this embracing this distrust in using the national languages for educational purposes was the reason why it was decided to have a parallel biliteracy program, because usually the literature would recommend that such a program focuses on the national languages only. But the reason why English was kept is because it was felt that switching to having literacy lessons in the national languages only wouldn't be supported by parents or the general public in general.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, I just noticed I'm just catching up with the chat. Right. Yeah, so I think a follow-up sort of idea about that those are, I guess, sort of national languages or local languages, not necessarily linked to ideas about whether there's a connection for improvement in later life. Are those local languages associated with socioeconomic advancement, or those types of things? Are they are, again, speaking from our own project, that seem to be factors that are influencing quite a mixture of opinion that we seem to be getting back from parents or communities, some very, very strongly in favour, and some with other, very strong kind of attitudes against it as well. So really interesting where's there, but the idea that there can be sort of PR, if you like, for want of a better word, for the use of local languages or national languages. I think that's a really interesting move, isn't it? And a comment from sorry, carry on.
No, you carry on.
So from Serge, is the content of the school material translated from English, or do they develop extra material taking into account children's environment? So using objects that children can see as everyday illustrations. Interesting.
I'll have to ask you maybe to the English literacy lessons are mostly based, so they actually use, so it's fairly complex. So they mostly use jollyphonics. So they're mostly informed by Jollyphonics, but some of them, so a UK-based approach to literacy, and others, some use Segura, so which is a Swedish initiative. So the literacy material in the national languages, as far as I understand, was developed independently, and did. The second half of the question was about how how context appropriate. So and that's been taken into account. So the words that would be introduced, for example, would be words of objects which are relevant to the life of the children. So when I was talking also about paying attention to the particular varieties used by the communities, also used, there are differences, for example, so the teachers adapt what they're doing. So if they've got rural, they're teaching children in rural areas, the words they might use might be slightly different, and inversely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that sort of is really important as well for enabling parents or other community members who might be working with children outside of schools as well to be supportive of literacy development practices as well. So if they can see an object that is familiar to them in their everyday lives, the parent doesn't necessarily have to have that literacy in the local languages in order to be able to be part of any kind of use of those languages, or that they can be part of that process as well, which I think is obviously really crucial to not only attitudinal changes around the use of those languages, but also motivating and all keeping those kind of practices going. It's great. I think we've got sort of a moment or two left, but if there's no other questions, sorry, also from Serge, I was wondering how much of the country have you actually covered so far? So are you working in a specific area with the work that you're doing? I think that's, sorry, Serge, if I've got the question wrong.
Okay, I thought the question was about the program. So I should have said the program focuses on well, I did mention that it focuses on public schools. So currently the program excludes private schools and madrasas. All the conversations I've had with head teachers and teachers in madrasas have suggested that they are also interested in integrating the national languages. But as far as how much of the country I've covered, so that's something I want to focus on. So I've got some field work coming up, and I want to make sure that I cover all the national languages. So in terms of observing lessons, etc., so that I cover all the languages, cover urban and rural areas, and the 6 regions. So the Gambia is divided into 6 administrative regions when it comes to education. So I want to make sure that that I cover those. So that's so far it's fairly limited in terms of the provenance of the interviewees, but the interviewees have experience of both. So some of them have extensive experience of working in rural areas or training teachers in rural areas. So in that sense, the data sample is small, but I felt that fairly diverse range of views and beliefs were represented, because people with different levels of seniority and with experience of both rural and urban educational context was represented. The only thing which I wasn't able to do was I only had 1 female participant, and this isn't something I could address within the time that I had.
Okay, thank you so much. That's been super interesting. Thank you not only Clyde, to yourself and Mamadou, but also to everybody for all of your questions as well. It's been really great. Were there any final comments you wanted to make, or we could just say sort of well done, thank you very much? And
I should say I forgot. I'm launching the project website, so it's Me Gambia. So I'm launching it today. It's not I'm finding that having a baby slows things down, so it's still missing. I'll keep adding to it, but it's Me Gambia, so me as in multilingual education, so megambia.wordpress.com, and there will be I'll try to keep posting resources relevant to the different national languages, be it in terms of just because it gives one the opportunity to read in those national languages, or teaching resources, etc. So if you've got suggestions of resources I could post, then do be in touch.
That's fantastic, and Hannah's just put that in the chat as well for everyone that should be there too. That's brilliant. So yes, thank you so much, and so everything will be going online to our website, so you can kind of see the talk again there, and then look at the following the next session in 2 weeks, I think, which will be us, I think, isn't it, talking about our project as well. So very exciting. So yes, thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming along today, and again to Clyde and Mamadou for a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.